Shirley Chisholm, what a pleasure to have you here and welcome you to Rutgers because you've been here before. And I want to begin congratulating you because be honored with an honorary doctorate from Rutgers. And as I understand, this is your 40th honorary doctorate. So I can't say Dr. Chisholm because I'd have to do 40 doctors. Congratulations, and it's an honor for us to be able to participate in conferring your 40th honorary doctorate.
Thank you very much.
When I think about the road, the Shirley Chisholm Trail, way back to where it started, it didn't start so far away. It started in Brooklyn, New York. You were born in Brooklyn, New York,
yes,
a Brooklyn girl. You actually went to college. You took 6 years out and went to live with your grandmother in Barbados, and then came back and went to Brooklyn College and Columbia University. And then somewhere you got the political bug and ran for the New York legislature at a time when very few women and very few African Americans were making that kind of decision. Tell me a little bit about what made you decide to do that?
That decision was made when I was a sophomore in Brooklyn College. We had a Democratic leader in Brooklyn who came to give a lecture on the plight of blacks in the political arena. And there's one thing that he said that really upset me. He said the black people are beginning to move out now, but they'll never be able to make it unless there's a white person or persons with them. They can't do it by themselves. I remember Stanley Steingut, who was the Speaker of the Assembly, New York State Assembly at that time. And that stayed in my head and was the kind of statement that was made that propelled me to show him, well, you'll see. And that's how I began to really feel that I had to make some kind of contribution, because I was not afraid. I was always a very outspoken person, and I was determined to show him that we could do it. And that's how it started.
What were the things that you were outspoken about in those early days? I know you got to be called the Fightin' Shirley Chisholm at some point in your career, and even we'll talk a little bit later on, wrote a book called The Good Fight, but that was about a different phase of your career. But what were some of the things that you spoke out about that impelled you, that you were?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the main things that really impelled me was the plight of women in the political arena. At the time when I came forth, women did not have a chance to run for any political office. And yet, in many of the Democratic clubs, you found that the majority of women raised the funds that was necessary to run the men for political office. But when a woman dared to say that she felt she wanted to run for an office, it never happened. And I joined a local Democratic club in Brooklyn. And I remembered when I came to join the club, Boss Carney, he was flabbergasted because he said, that woman, I know what's going to happen in this club now. And what happened was that I came to the club one evening, and he indicated that you women have to do many things to raise money to run the gentleman for office. We need funds. Go out and raise money. But he never gave us any seed money. So women had to take the money from their household accounts and everything to run, to do this job. And I raised my hand. I knew he saw me, but he didn't want to call on me. And I stood up. I said, Mr. Leader, I have something I want to say. I said, it's very interesting to note that you expect the women of this club to raise the funds that are necessary for the gentleman to run for office, but you do not give them any seed money. They have to take the money from their regular budgets, and that's not fair. Well, all hell broke loose. Then the women, because I was a club that was filled with Irish women, they said, go to it, Shirley, go to it, Shirley, and that's all I needed. To know that I had the support. And it was the first time in the club that the Democratic Club gave funds for the women to use the seed money to really prepare us to run for office. Well, that didn't work too well because everybody the gentlemen got together at a club. It was a bunch of Irishmen. And they got to say, what are you going to do with her? She just joined this club and she's going to cause a lot of trouble. We'll put her on the board. They put me on the board, and the little things that they were talking about upset me. And they didn't think that I would go back and share this kind of information with the women. So I went back and told the women some of the things that was said. And all hell broke loose in that club. And it was at that moment that the club began to develop into an institution whereby men and women could hold office, and men and women can almost be seen on an equal basis.
And it sounds as if it was a mixed race club. These weren't,
yes.
The clubs were
That's right. It wasn't
multiracial, multicultural.
Yes, but this club that I'm talking about was dominated by Irishmen. And they said, no, we can't run women for office. It's not time yet for blacks to come forth. And they gave all of their excuses. And I broke that up.
Well, take us forward a little bit. So you were active in the club, I know, in the 1950s, and then ran for the legislature and went to Albany and served in. How many women were in the legislature when you got there, in the New York State legislature?
Oh, my goodness. I think it might be 3 or 4 of us.
3 or 4?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget.
3 or 4 pioneers in Albany?
Yes, in Albany, New York.
And then,
you got the feeling that you were out of space. They looked at you very strangely. And of course, like everything else, I'm not afraid to speak up. I'm fearless. And like everything else, I just developed into being the natural leader of these women. So the men hated my guts. He said, she won't shut up. She's always raising issues. She's always asking the how, the when, the where, and the why. And from that time, I went to the state legislature up until the time I went to Congress. Men have always looked at me askance.
So how is it possible then, you went to the legislature and you were there for a few years, and then you made an extraordinary decision, given the times, to run for the United States Congress? How did you make that decision, especially if you're saying that the men who were in power didn't support you? How did you make that happen?
I made that happen because the man that I was running against, that was going to be my opponent, was James Farmer, the famous leader of CORE, the Congress on Racial Equality. And James Farmer laughed when I made the bid to go to Congress. He said, she's a school teacher. I mean, and look at her. She's tiny, she's frail. She can't do that kind of work. And what made me very angry was he used to have sound trucks stop at 10 subway stations every day while he was campaigning. And in these trucks were loads of black men who beat the drums, the tom-toms. You know, these were the macho men. And these were men that had big muscles and everything. And they said, look at little Shirley Chisholm. She's so frail. She's weak. And he just played that till there was no end. But something told me, you know what you do? You go to the Board of Elections, because I had this feeling. You go to the Board of Elections and see the registration of men and women in this community. The women voted 2-1. And I decided that I was going to slant my campaign. Boy, I went out, the Italian women, the Jewish women, all of the different kind of women decided that they were going to back Shirley Chisholm to go to Congress. And then, in addition to that, I spoke Spanish fluently. So when I went into the Puerto Rican neighborhoods and I would say, señores y señores, escúchame, he just went crazy. And that's how I do it. You had to think of the different things that you could do. And I won, and everybody, they were laughing. She can't do it. You know, a little frail thing.
So you got the women's support across race, across ethnicity.
Mm-hmm.
You got the women's support.
I did.
What did you win with? Do you remember what the percentage was in your first?
2.5 to 1. It was really, I mean, people were stunned because he had a beautiful voice and he was a good orator, and he just went around the neighborhood with these trucks of these big men being the tom-toms, and we need a man to go to the House of Representatives. We don't need any little frail school teacher.
So you went to Washington, you won this in 1968, and you went to Washington as the first, I mean, I think this is so important for our young people to know, the first African-American woman ever to go to the United States Congress.
You're right.
First.
Right, the first.
And when you got there, out of the 435 members of the House of Representatives, there were 10 women.
10
you were
women.
one of 10 women.
Yes.
It's just extraordinary. And that was 1968, which might seem like a long time ago for some of our students, but it's not that long ago.
That's right. That's right.
What did you do in the Congress? What were the issues that you worked on? What was it like when you got there?
We work on the very same issues today. The issues of education, the issues of health problems, the issues of good housing, the very issues that have to do with the day-to-day living of people in the communities. These were the issues I dwelt on because these were the issues that were really affecting black folks.
If I remember correctly, those issues, housing and education, all of which affected your constituents, had nothing to do with the committee that the House leadership put you on when you got there. I think they were mixed up about your district. Is that right?
Well, when I got to the Congress, I had achieved some kind of a record in the New York State Legislature, and they said before she gets started, let's quell her right now. And they decided that they were going to put me on the Committee for Rural Villages and Forests.
Rural villages
And forests. Here I come from a district that's primarily an urban district, and these men are going to put me on a district where you have to deal with trees. Didn't even know that they didn't read the book of Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I refused to accept the committee assignment. And the gentleman said to me, you don't dictate to us what committee you want to get on. The committee that you may be interested in will come a little bit later on if you stay here. But I don't know if you're going to stay here because, you know. And I said, I will not serve on a committee on forestry and rural villages. Look at the kind of district I represent. They didn't want to hear about it. So I decided, well, I'll have to do something about it. So I wrote a little speech that I was going to make, and I went down to the floor, and the men in the Congress knew that I was going to really raise this issue, and they, you know, they want to see something happen because they're bored. Shirley, give it to them. Those speakers, and give it to them. I went, and you know what they did to me? I'll never forget this. I stood up about 7 or 8 times to get recognition from the speaker so that I could speak, and he refused to recognize me. He had already arranged that every time Shirley Chisholm would jump up to get recognition, one of the men should jump up and they would call on them first because of seniority. See, this was done so that I would just get plain tired. But they didn't know Shirley Chisholm. I got so mad. I wrote a little speech that I was going to give. And then I threw the speech down in the chair, and I marched right down to the well of the House. And the speaker, he was frightened because you don't march down to the well of the House unless you receive recognition. And here I stand, and I said, go to Shirley, and this is all I needed. But the men are saying, go to, and they, you know, and the speaker said, we will have order in this house. And the men were carrying on. So I went down, and I made my speech. I said, I will not accept any membership on the Committee on Rural Villages and Forests, because apparently you all did not read the book, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. A tree does not grow in Brooklyn, and I cannot represent something that has nothing at all to do with the needs and the concerns of the constituency that I represent. The speaker jumped off the platform. He didn't know what to do because in the first place, I should not have run down to the aisle because nobody had recognized me. But I got so tired of getting up to get recognition, and every time I got up, he picked somebody that had seniority. And, well, they put me on the Education and Labor Committee and every committee that is better. And from that time on, nobody could put anybody on just any committee they wanted. I broke that.
That's quite an achievement.
Yes, it was. It was. Well, then what happened really is that the men became very much, I would say this, I didn't have any real power because I was a freshman, but the men became afraid of the tactics that I used and usually succeeded. They said she was a good strategist. She knew what to do. They became very much afraid of that. And from that time on, when they wanted special things to be done, before they would do it, if they had a feeling that I was going to object, they would have a private meeting with me and about 5 or 6 men to calm me down first before we do anything.
What would you say in that period, that time that you were in the Congress, which actually was, you got there in '69, and you left in '82. You did something in between that was pretty significant. We'll get to it in a minute. But in that period, what would you say was your proudest legislative achievement? You know, obviously this kind of reform on seniority is very important. But as far as your legislative achievement, well, what do you think back as
I
something?
think Title I, and then Title IX, the Title IX in education, that was the bill that had to do with women having the opportunity to win scholarships on the athletic field. That's how women got to win athletic scholarships. That was very, very important. And then, of course, the minimum wage. I worked on that.
Oh yes, I remember the minimum wage, especially for domestic workers,
That's
was
right.
a very important issue.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay, so here you are, the first African-American woman in the Congress of the United States. There are only 10 women in the entire Congress of the United States. You get there in 1969, and lo and behold, in 1972, we have a presidential election, and Shirley Chisholm decides to run for president of the United States and launches a campaign and takes it all the way through to the Democratic Convention. This is 2002 that we're sitting and talking. No other woman in our history has done that. No woman did it before that, and no one has done it since then. You did it. What on earth made you do that? Did you think you could become president of the United States?
No, of course not. I knew I could not become president. But the time had come when persons other than males could run for the presidency of this country. Why couldn't a woman run? Why couldn't a black person run? I was angry that everything always redounded to the benefit of white males. It made me mad. You had very brilliant women. You had brilliant black men, and they couldn't even think of it. And it made me mad. So I decided that I would remake a bid. Of course, I knew I couldn't win. But somewhere, somehow, they had to get used to the idea that persons other than white males could be president of this country and should be president. So I decided to put my hat in the ring. I had a ball. I had a ball. I traveled in about 20-something states, and I carried my message to the people. And it was surprising. I was really surprised how many people knew that I couldn't be president, but they acknowledged the fact that I was not afraid to chart a new course in the history of this country.
And you did not have the support, as I remember you were in the Congress when the Congressional Black Caucus was formed, and there was a growing organization of black elected officials, and you didn't have the support of the African American political community, and the feminists were split because
they were split right
they wanted to win. They were worried about a symbolic race, and yet you went ahead. Who were your biggest supporters?
You know, my biggest supporters were I would say were the little folk all over this country. The little folk, they knew within themselves that I could not become president of the United States. I couldn't win. But what they loved about me, the fact that I had the tenacity and the spirit and the determination to chart the course. And they just And I was so surprised. 7 women? Oh, I was so surprised that, you know, the South at that time was very discriminatory. But they supported it. It was a marvelous campaign. It was marvelous.
And it was during that time that one of the most racist white males in our history was running, George Wallace,
Yes.
and he was shot.
Yes, George Wallace was shot in Maryland. And when George Wallace got shot, that was the time I almost lost my congressional seat because I went to the hospital to see him. All of us who were running at that time, Jackson, Muskie, Humphrey, McGovern, all of us who were running for the presidency at that time went to see George Wallace. So I was running for president too, so why couldn't I go to see him? But because of what he had did with respect to the University of Alabama, blacks came down on me like white on rice. Said you had no right to go and visit him. And when I went to visit him, George Wallace, I see him now seated up in his bed on pillows. And he had his hands on all kinds of tubes coming through his nose. Oh, he looked terrible. But he was able to say, Shirley Chisholm, what you doing here? I said, George, I came to see you. He said, Shirley Chisholm, you had no business being here. You know what's going to happen to you. I said, don't worry what's going to happen to me. God put you on this bed for a reason. And he said, come over here, I want to talk to you. And I went over by his bed and he sat and I held his hand. His hands were clammy and I kept clammy. And he said, but you know what your folks going to say? I don't want you to lose your seat. You don't know. I said, don't worry about me and my folks. I had to come and see you, George. And you're lying there for a reason. And he just cried. Oh, he cried because he couldn't understand in terms of what he had done at the University of Alabama, standing in the doorway of the University of Alabama and saying, no, blacks can come in here. I mean, he couldn't understand how I, who had decided to make a challenge for the presidency, could come to see him. And it was time to go, and he didn't want me to go. He really, really, really cried. And then I guess about 4 years after that, he sent for me. And then I landed at the Montgomery, Alabama airport. He had people all over the roofs of the buildings at the airport. Policemen were there. He wanted to show me what had happened. He had changed somewhat. And I went to the governor's mansion and he showed me all of the black people that he had appointed as Secretary of State and Secretary. He wanted me to see.
That is just an extraordinary accomplishment during that presidential campaign. I wish we could talk for hours. We've only got a limited time, so I'm going to ask you, given all of that history, and there's so much more, what would you say to young people today? You ran for office against all expectations and tides. You served with distinction. What would you tell young people today? Is that a way to go? Would you encourage them, and what would you tell them?
I would tell them to study hard, get a good education, and make your mind up as to what you want to do in life. And whatever it is that you want to do, drown yourself in it. Look neither to the north nor the south. Look neither to the east nor the west. But just plod on and on and on. And look only to God and to your conscience for approval of whatever you do. Not man.
And would you encourage them to go into politics?
Oh, yes. It's needed.
It's needed?
Oh, it's needed. It's needed. Sometimes, like today, I'm just so discouraged in a sense because I think we are seeing that a lot of men and women who are really well equipped to run for office don't want to run for office because of all of this stuff that goes on. And we really need good people, people that are committed, people that have integrity, people that have soul to run for office.
And I think also you said somewhere that you didn't see, if I'm remembering correctly, you didn't see enough courage in office today. And that you're certainly someone whose history that word applies to.
Yes, I always Well, from the time I was 2 years old, my mother just couldn't handle me. I always had courage to speak out, to speak up, and my motto is, you know, you look only to God and your conscience for approval. And I'm a deeply religious person. I do not wear my religion on my sleeve because people get the wrong impression. Oh, talk with God, talk with God. But I know that my faith has sustained me.
Well, your faith has, and your history have inspired so many people, and I know will continue to. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and again, congratulations on your 40th honorary degree.
Oh, thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you very much.